Alright, so here we are over in the mold mix station. Thanks for going on that journey with me. You'll hear that the updraft is on. We didn't turn the updraft on for the first video, and it was quite dusty. And so for this one, you're just going to have to bear with the background noise, because I think it'll be just sort of better. But so what I'm going to do is shake it up a little bit, hold this over by the updraft, and do a spritz, spritz, turn, spritz, spritz, turn, spritz, spritz, turn. It's a super fine particulate, and you shouldn't see any residue, but if you sort of run your hand over, you'll feel just like the slightest element of silkiness. That's all you need. Please don't overdo this, because we have a limited amount as well as everything. And we want it to stretch for you guys, and I also just want to teach you how to do this right. So I'm going to put that off to the side, and then what we're going to do is these are clear, so I can see that I'm going to need to fill my alginate, like let's say to the middle line of the H. So that'll be my fill mark for my other two containers that I filled. So the first one that I'll do is the alginate container. I'll walk over to the alginate, and then I'll also fill the water. When I walk over to the alginate with the container to fill it up, I want to make sure that I choose the container that has nothing in it except alginate. So no water or like gooiness. These are clean from the last time, so I'm going to pop them back in and listen for that click. Click, click. Bigger bucket. Alginate water, bigger bucket. Water goes in first, as always. And then for this amount, I'll probably just do 2 halves. So half. Mix it just till it's incorporated and not dusty, and then do the rest. I don't know if the camera can capture this, but when the alginate gets this sort of two-tone, like really well mixed look, that's an indication that I'm ready. And so we can look at the timestamp in the video, but my sense is that that's like a minute to a minute and a half of mixing at this scale. The bigger amounts of alginate you mix, the longer you have to mix for, so the shorter the set life. So Madeline's gonna hold the camera. So we're looking inside the object, and I'm going to pour along the side and let it fill from the sides on up.
That's satisfying.
So satisfying. We can put this on YouTube ASMR feeds. So I'm going to fill, so there's about a ½ inch of material above, and if I'm uncertain about how much is filled above, I can dunk my finger in, find the bottom, and pull out. And that's a really good way to catch level. And then I'm going to gently tap the sides, or if I'm sure the object is affixed well, I can also tap the whole container. Just be aware, if you've not affixed your object well to the bottom of your container, you might witness the miraculous uprising of the object that you're trying to make a mold of, at which point you're just gonna say, F it, and start again. Don't try to save it.
That would suck.
There's no saving. But you can see a lot of bubbles rising to the surface. We're not actually trying to get the bubbles necessarily to rise up to the surface, but rather away from the object. I also want to point out before we stop this video that for cleanup, I'm just going to let the dirty bucket set, and then I'm just going to peel the alginate out. There's no need to try to clean it when it's unset. It just makes a mess, and it's so much easier the other way. All right, I'll see you in a few minutes. All right, so the alginate is set. You can see that the surface is spongy and firm. But like obviously if I wanted to, I could definitely break it. It's not a super strong material. And now I have to get it out of the container. So this is gonna be fun to watch me do, because it's really just gonna be me doing a lot of pressing and squeezing, and sometimes I have to get like an actual mechanical object in there, especially for this one, because I've shoved a bunch of clay in the bottom. But I'm gonna press, press, press. You can see me sort of deforming, and you can also see that the alginate is beginning to pull away. So that's good. Ah, beautiful. So sorry, I'm showing that to Madeline. I should be showing it to the camera. So you can see that the clay is still in there, and then the cup is still in here. So the next thing to do before we pour our wax in is to obviously remove the cup. So I'm going to be very gentle here because the alginate is terrible.
Good one.
Sorry, it's not terrible, but it is terrible. And I'm going to gently pull it away, and then trying not to deform the alginate too much, I'm going to wiggle, 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 adorable. And so, you know, you could still drink your glasses of water out of this when you're not in a room full of masked people. And then you can also look on the inside. I can see that a few bubbles were caught, but really this is a pretty pristine thing for an alginate mold. So we'll pause here. I'll meet you over by the wax station. Okay, cool. I forgot to say this in the last video, but these little sort of, these troughs that we use to contain any spills or anything like that, they're pretty old for silicone in terms of studio use. And you can see that they don't release wax super well anymore because their surface has all of these sort of micro scratches and just they've degraded over time. So before I pour wax into them, I'll also give them a little spritz with the universal smooth on universal mold release because that will help them stay or make them easier to clean. When I do this, I'm just going to close the wax pots mostly, so none of the mold release gets in there. It's not a big deal if it does, but why mix stuff into your wax when you don't have to? So there's a passive updraft above the wax. So I'll just sort of hold it in here a little bit and spritz into the corners and then a little bit all over. And you can see that the spray gets sort of softly and gently dragged up as opposed to over there with the active updraft, which is much more aggressive. All right, so I've got my cutie pie thing. There is no container on this to rigidize the alginate. So it's a little bit more wobbly, which means that I am not going to lift it up and slosh the wax around because there's a good chance that A, it's sort of slippery because it's already sort of degrading and a little slimy. But also, I don't need to do that with this shape because it is, it's uniform and there are no undercuts. So as long as I tap, tap, tap out any bubbles, I should be good to go. So I'm gonna get a decent sized ladle full of wax. Wax. Make sure that all of the glass you grab is liquid. We do recycle clean wax back into this pot, so if there are sort of any unmelted chunks of wax, try not to dump them in your alginate molds because it will make things worse. And then I'm just going to aim for the center and fill. And if I overflow a little, that's fine. I want it to fill all the way up to the top. That's a satisfying moment. And then I'm going to tap, tap, tap. And I'm watching some bubbles release from the sides. It's also really fun because it's like tapping a jello mold. Blah, 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 blah. All right, no more bubbles are releasing. And then because this is a smushy thing, I'm not gonna pick it up, I'm just gonna move it over to the side. And if I needed to move it away from the wax station, I would grab a coddle from over there, slide it underneath and lift up the coddle, because this is obviously very smushy. And even you saw in just that moment, I slid it and a bunch of wax splashed out, which is fine, I'm just gonna top it up. Very satisfying. All right, so gently sliding this over, letting it cool down over here. And then I will just do a quick cleanup conversation before we pause until the wax is cool enough for us to demold the alginate. All right, so let's talk a little bit about cleanup procedures for making alginate molds and pouring waxes into the molds. This is one of the most user-friendly cleanup processes. So we have these are basically all of the buckets and receptacles that we used for our alginate mixing processes. So what we have here are the ones that we used for the little cup. What was just used for water, so that's already clean. I can put that one away. The other one was just for dry alginate, so all I have to do with this is rinse it. So this is gonna be super fun to watch, but it's now clean. I feel good about that, so I can put these both away to dry on the rack. That was the easiest step. The second easiest step, and I would argue also the most pleasurable step, is cleaning up the alginate bucket that you mixed the alginate in. So the alginate is obviously all set. It's all set. And I get to do this really fun thing, which you will all experience. And if you have like a little material OCD like I do, it's a huge pleasure just to be able to pull the alginate off the sidewalls. And then the bucket is sort of, it's just one floppy bucket. Blur, 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 and that can go right in the rubbish bin. And then any little bits that have spilled on the side, you can pull up. And then I generally will just do a little rinse on the sides of the bucket in case it's dusty or anything like that. And I guess, you know what I'm thinking is for this class, because of the unique situation we find ourselves in with COVID, we're gonna rinse all of the buckets with soapy water. And then we'll put them away to dry, and that will kill any sort of sneaky bugs that are sitting on the surface after we've been touching with them with our hands. I'm not doing that right now because I'm the only one working in here, so just cleaning them and drying them will sterilize them. But as we're working in here, there's soap over next to the sink. We'll just make a little soapy water slurry and dunk the clean buckets, and then that should suffice for these shared tools. All right, so now we're gonna get to the next two things that are a little bit trickier to clean, and I'm not gonna make you watch me clean them because that is a form of torture that I'm not prepared to dole out. But we shoved a bunch of plastilina clay in the bottom of this container. The container is reusable, so we need to get all of the clay out so it can be reused for any process. So what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna use my tools in my toolbox and I'm gonna scrape it all out. The plastilina is reusable, so I'm gonna put it, ball it all up and put it away. And then I'm gonna use a sponge and some soapy water to make sure any of that sort of oily clay residue is gone. So yeah, I'm not gonna do that for you, but that's gonna be the method for here. And then for this, once my wax is cool, I'm gonna pull the alginate out. And what's going to happen, oops, is that I've spilled wax along the edge of my shared reusable bucket. This is like a borderline no-no for this class, but for this process, it's something that we might have to do. So basically what I'm gonna do is just spend a little time with tools or just with my hands pulling the wax off until the chunks of it are gone, and then I'm just gonna take it to the sink and use the rough end of a sponge with some soap and get the wax off. I really want these buckets to last as long as we can. So do the best that you can. The way that you'll know it's clean is if you can't see any brown residue left. And when you run your finger over it, it doesn't feel waxy. I think that if you know that you hate cleaning things, use buckets that you can throw out, and then it doesn't matter if wax gets on the side. See you in a second for demolding the alginates.